If you were to ask me this morning, how would you measure success at Northern Hills Church? I could actually very quickly point you to either our website, I could point you to one of the Connection magazines this morning where this is written, but I could also share with you this morning, if you were to ask me that question, that success, in other words, how do we measure whether or not we're accomplishing our mission as a church? How do we know if we're living and leading towards God? How do we know if we're being disciples, growing as disciples who are growing other disciples? How do we measure this? I could share that with you in one statement, and that is that we measure success in Northern Hills Church not by how many we're bringing in, but by how many we're sending out. There's something amazing that's happening as Melody leaves us for a time here. As she goes out, called by God to go and serve others, to go and love others, to go and share what God's done in her life with other people. In other words, what we're trying to accomplish here, who we're trying to be as a church, is not bringing people in. We're trying to send people out because we are the sent ones. We believe that God has called us into relationship and into community so that we can together be sent out, living our lives as missionaries. And so the question isn't how many people do we have gathered here on Sundays. The question is how many of us, how many people do we have living in our communities, in our homes, in their workplaces, with their friends who are being a light for Jesus, who are with their families when nobody's watching. Who are we? Are we living for God? Are we being faithful? I'm going to borrow an illustration from Francis Chan this morning. But he talks about the game Simon Says. You ever played Simon Says before? I always used to think as a kid when I played Simon Says, or I used to wonder, who is Simon? Kind of seemed like a little bit of a bossy kind of guy, didn't he? Yeah, why do I have to do what Simon says? And who's the original Simon? These are the weird things that went through my mind in playing Simon Says. But the game of Simon Says works like this. Simon says that you do it. If Simon doesn't say it, you better not do it, or you're out of the game. It's interesting if we would consider a similarity in regards to a game we might play called Jesus Says. When it comes to Jesus, it's interesting how sometimes we act as though when Jesus says something, we don't actually have to do something. We just have to know it. We have to memorize it. We have to learn it. In other words, we spend a lot of time at church, in Bible studies, reading Scripture, learning things, knowing things, memorizing things as Christians. We can easily spend a lot of time on this, but what good is all of it if it doesn't move us to action, if it doesn't change who we are? When we're in our homes, when we're in our workplaces, when we're with our friends, what good is all of this? Don't hear me in any way saying this morning it's not good to be in a church. It's not good to be in Bible study. Those are incredibly important, essential, which I'll be sharing this morning later on. But when it comes to our faith, understanding faith, what faith is, the question isn't necessarily how much do I know, what can I say, it's how am I living, how is my faith being shown through the way in which I'm living. In this scenario in which we gather for church, we gather for small groups, we gather with other Christians, we study our Bibles, we memorize Scripture, but don't live this out and don't act upon it where it doesn't actually influence, it doesn't impact, it doesn't change the way in which we live. It would be like me asking my daughter to go and clean her room and having her come back a few hours later and saying, I did it, I memorized what you said. You said, Eva, go and clean your room. And guess what? I actually have some friends that are going to come over later. We're going to study what it might look like if we cleaned our room. You know, that would be a little silly, wouldn't it be? That's not what I asked her to do. And so when we are called to faith, I want to ask you the question, is faith knowing and saying things, or is faith living out what we know and what we say? We have to know things. We have to be able to proclaim these things and believe these things. But are we living this out? God hasn't called us to simply know and say things. God's called us to a life of faith which lives out what we know and we say. A life of faith is a life of action and a commitment on our part to faith is a commitment to action. I want to speak for a few moments about core values. If I were to ask you this morning, what are your core values for your life? Would you be able to give an answer? Have you ever considered this? Have you ever considered maybe what your priorities are? What are the things driving you, guiding and directing you? What are your beliefs and your convictions? You see, we might not consider these things, we might not think about them very often, but the reality is we all do have things that we value, things that drive our life, things that shape and form all of our choices and our direction in life. And so we all have these personal values. But I want to share with you this morning, again, the core values of our church. Share with you more than anything even the purpose for core values in a church. Well, what are core values? They are beliefs or convictions that guide and direct my behavior and support our purpose and our vision. The reason in which we have core values is because we want to be driven by these things. When it comes to the ministry in our church, when it comes to the path of our church, our future, where we're going, these are the things in which we've chosen to shape us, to form us, to give us direction. And so when we're considering ministry, when we're considering where to go next, what to do next, then these core values, they shape us. These are the things shaping us. In other words, these are the things helping to form and shape our identity as a church, of who we are, what is our DNA, and who are we. I want to mention this morning that as well with these core values, they aren't something simply for us to kind of shape ministry around or for us to consider the future of the church together. I want to remind us this morning that we are the church as the people. And who we are is who our church is. And so beyond anything, far beyond anything, and more meaningful and purposeful than anything, these core values are for each of us as we consider our lives, as we shape our own lives, as we create our own identity as followers of Jesus. I want to move through them really quickly. We're going to speak about one for the next little while. But I just want to share them briefly before I begin this series. And one is prayer. Obviously, prayer is an essential thing as a follower of Jesus Christ. As we want to pursue his desires, his direction, prayer is a prerequisite. We can't go anywhere without prayer. Action. Action is assumed. We believe that as followers of Jesus Christ, though surrendered to him, we are called to a life of action, that we aren't called to a faith that simply has us know things. We're called to a faith that moves us into action within our lives, changing and transforming the life and the people, lives and the people around us in our life. Change, we believe change is required actually as a follower of Christ, especially as a church. The whole core and essence of Christianity, of being a follower of Jesus Christ, of surrendering to him, is giving up, is dying to ourselves and opening ourselves to Christ, letting him transform us, letting him renew us, letting him restore us, make us new, and especially as the body of Christ, take us somewhere, lead us forward in his mission and his goals, his direction. And so change is going to be required. There's a purpose for that being actually one of our core values, and making sure that we hold that up as something that's especially important to us is because change is probably one of the most difficult things for all of us, for all people. It's a difficult thing, but we believe God has places to take not only our church, but to take each of our lives. So we have to be open to try new things, to go in where God leads. Transparency. We believe transparency needs to be the standard within our church. We're only here because of grace. And so this isn't a place to wear masks. This is a place for those masks to be taken off and for us to surround each other with love, support, encouragement, understanding, and the love of God. And intentionality. We want to do everything on purpose, including our values, what it is that we're holding up as most important in our church. We want to do these things on purpose. We want to know why we're doing things. We actually believe that everything should be done on purpose. We shouldn't just hope we accidentally stumble upon things, but we should really, when we're considering something like the mission of God and living for God in this world, and accomplishing what He's set out to accomplish and has in store for us, that we must consider deeply what that is, and we must pursue it with passion. So over the next 6 weeks, we're going to be talking about faith. Not just faith, we're going to be talking about faith that is alive, when faith comes to life. In essence, over the next 6 weeks, what we're going to be talking about is our core value of action, what a life of action looks like. What does it really look like when we live a faithful life within our church family, within our own family, within the home in which we live in, within our circle of influence or the friends in which we spend all of our time with, in our workplaces, in our communities, with our neighbors? What does this look like? What does a life of faith look like? I believe Scripture speaks to this significantly. It gives us incredible clarity and direction for where our lives should be headed, where God's calling us to, and how God's calling us to live, be, and to act. And so we're going to be focusing on this for a time now. I'd like for you to open up your Bibles this morning to James chapter 2. We're going to focus on a passage within James chapter 2 this morning. And as you do that, I want to share a few things before we read this passage together about the book of James. I want to teach you a little bit about this author, James. First of all, I want you to know that this is a general epistle. This is, in other words, it's not written to a specific church in the first century. This is written to a group of Christians, so it's an open letter. It's actually originally believed to be within Palestine, within that region. This largely circulated for Christians within that area. It's actually, we read at the very beginning of the book of James that it was written to a Jewish Christian audience, is likely the very focused audience of the book of James. It's widely accepted and believed that, obviously, when we read the book of James, the author is James, and its self-described author is James, and so we know it's a James, and there's a few different Jameses in the first century, but it's widely accepted and believed, and it has been since very early on, that it was James, the brother of Jesus, that wrote the book of James. There's a lot to share in regards to why it's believed this is Jesus, the brother of John. There's a lot that we learn and actually hear about and read about throughout the Gospels and actually into the book of Acts about James and his role within the church. It's interesting, with this being James, the brother of Jesus, to consider who James was. I want to share a couple things about him that are important as we read what he's about to share with us. Let's learn about who he is. Does he have the right to be sharing with us what he's about to share with us? James was the brother of Jesus. That's something spectacular, isn't it? Wouldn't that be something a little bit spectacular, to have been the brother of Jesus, to share the mother with Jesus? But we actually find James within one of the Gospels doubting Jesus in his ministry, which is interesting. Later on, we find in the book of Acts, we find that James is actually, he rose to prominence within the Jewish church, within the Jerusalem church, and so he actually became a significant and prominent leader guiding the Jerusalem church. But early on, we find him as Jesus was in his ministry, doubting Jesus and doubting his ministry, which shouldn't be too surprising. If your brother came up to you and said, "Hey, I'm the Savior of the world, I'm God," I'd probably have a hard time believing him until I witnessed him raised from the dead. I might start questioning my doubt in him as I see him healing people, raising people. So it's not surprising that we see James, the brother of John, a little bit curious about him during his ministry, and later on fully devoted to him and serving his church, helping build and grow his church after witnessing Jesus raised from the dead. We also learn that about James's death and how James' life came to an end. We learn this from a couple different sources, Eusebius and Josephus, which are non-biblical, non-scriptural. They're actually secular historians, authors who wrote during this time, and we read about James, the brother of Jesus, and his death. And we actually learn that he was stoned to death by scribes and Pharisees for refusing to renounce Jesus. So we know that James, the brother of Jesus, was stoned to death for refusing to renounce Jesus, for refusing to let go of his faith. We also know that he died in AD 62. And so what this means is, as we read the book of James this morning, this letter that James wrote to Jewish Christians, that this was actually written within 30 years of Jesus' death. It's actually widely kind of believed this was more close to between 45 and 50 AD, due to its content and really some of the other letters that Paul was writing to different churches and some of the things that he's writing about in here. So if you can kind of picture within this time frame, you can now picture this guy, James, the brother of Jesus, the one who's writing this and who he's writing this to. Let's go ahead this morning, actually, and we're going to go ahead and begin to read through this. We're going to slowly go through this. And let's go ahead and start in verse 14. John, I know I told you to wait, but go ahead and throw that up there for them if you can. We'll have this up here, but if you can go through this in your script, in your Bible as well, I want to encourage you to do that. So James begins in verse 14 of chapter 2, saying, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them?" And so in this first verse, James poses two questions. In other words, he's saying, is there any value in faith without deeds? Are we even saved if we have faith but we don't have deeds? These are significant questions. I want to explain he's asking these questions in the context of this understanding that the first century church had of justification through faith. I'm going to read a little bit later. There's two passages where Paul teaches on this, but the word justified, we're made right with God because of faith. And so the faith is what actually saves. Our faith is what actually saves us. And he's questioning, are we saved if we have faith but we don't have any deeds? James actually goes on. These are somewhat rhetorical questions because he immediately begins to answer his own questions. In verse 15 says, "Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." This is his answer to his own question. In other words, it would be as though your house burns down and I tell you, "I'm sorry your house burns down. I hope things work out for you." And then I let you sleep on the street and freeze. What good is that? What good is my saying this if I'm not actually helping you? And do I really wish the best for you if I'm not helping you? James uses the same word here. It's actually nekra, but it's from the root word, the subject is nekros, which is a Greek word for dead body, or corpse. And so he's being very blunt here. He's not beating around the bush. He's trying to be very clear that it's the same as a corpse. Faith without action is the same as a corpse. Let's continue in verse 18. "But someone will say, 'You have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds.' You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder." He's saying here that faith that is alive, faith that saves us, is more than a verbal profession. Our actions, not only our words, display what we truly believe. What good is faith without deeds? In this next verse, he states it's useless. In verse 20, he says, "You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar?" Now remember, he's writing this and speaking this to a Jewish Christian audience. As he brings up Abraham, a lot comes to mind as they understand Abraham and they know this story. Let me quickly abbreviate and summarize the story of Abraham this morning. As God calls Abraham, he's about to make a covenant with Abraham, but he wants to test the faith of Abraham. And so he asks Abraham to take his son one morning, to go to a mountain, to go up onto the mountain, and to make an altar and to sacrifice his only child. This is not just his only child. This is the child he waited forever for. As his wife was barren, they weren't able to have children. And God gifted him with this child. It's his only child, and asked him to go up and sacrifice him. In this incredible story of Abraham, we read of him taking his son in the morning, going to the mountain, going up on the mountain, building an altar, placing his son on the altar, and at the very last moment, God providing a ram for the sacrifice and commending Abraham and making a covenant with Abraham, which was a covenant which led to the Israelites to make his descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and for all mankind to be reached through his descendants, the nation of Israel, which is where Jesus ended up coming from. This incredible story of faith. What does James have to say about this incredible story of faith? He says, you see that his faith, Abraham's faith, and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In essence, James is stating the obvious. This should be something that's very obvious, I believe, that the faith of Abraham did not bring righteousness because of what he said, but by his actions which displayed his faith. It wasn't his proclamation of faith by words, but by action, which brought a covenant with God and which brought righteousness for Abraham because of his faith. Faith that is alive and faith that saves us is more than a verbal profession. He presents another story. He actually goes on to talk about Rahab. I don't have much time, but the story of Rahab is in the city of Jericho. She's actually a prostitute living in the city of Jericho. And God's people now, the Israelites, Abraham's descendants, are going into this promised land led by God as he's promised this land to them. And they sent out 2 spies into the city of Jericho to kind of see what the city looked like. And as they went into this city, the king of Jericho found out that there were spies there. And so they went into this house. And Rahab, the prostitute, helped these 2 Israelite men. She hid them and she helped them out of the city. And because of that, in the end, what ended up happening as they came to the city of Jericho, as they conquered the city of Jericho, she had a cord put on her house and she was saved. Her and her family were saved. They were saved because of what she had done. And this is what he has to say. In the same way was not even Rahab, the prostitute, considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. And then he says, as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. It's clear to see in the story of Rahab that her faith was evident in her actions. She risked her life as the guards came to her house and she hid those spies. Her faith wasn't simply something she said. Her faith was something she did. James is not saying that words are meaningless, but that faith is more than just simply words. Our spoken beliefs, if we read verse 26, this is an interesting illustration or metaphor or picture that we can get of our spoken beliefs, what we know about God, what we believe and can say about what we believe about God, that this is the body of faith. But actions, our actions, the way we live this out, this is the soul. In other words, there is no life in it. It's a corpse until it's lived out, until our faith is put into action. I want to make sure that I actually clarify here this morning. I said I'd get to Paul and his justification through faith. That James is not saying we're made right or we're saved because of good deeds or works. This is not the message of James here. And I want to share exactly why I believe he's not saying that here. We cannot earn our way to heaven through good deeds. God's desire isn't for us to do good things and to be good people. It is for us to have faith. James actually complements the teaching of Paul in Ephesians 2. Don't have this for you, but in Ephesians 2, 8-9, I want to just read it for you quickly here. It says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. In this passage, it's interesting because Paul is actually saying you can't be saved by works. You can't be saved by good deeds. Paul is actually speaking to a misunderstanding of works, of action, of living a certain way. He's speaking to a new Jewish Christian church who had been depending upon the law and ritual for their righteousness, for their being made right before God. And he's teaching that that's not where salvation comes from. Salvation comes through faith, and it is only because of the gift of grace. Paul is speaking to a misunderstanding of works, and James is speaking now to a misunderstanding of faith. In other words, James doesn't say we aren't saved by faith, but he deepens our understanding of faith, doesn't he? You see, it's easy to picture, just as we do sometimes, still today, considering faith, what it is we believe, and we start thinking about what do we know? What do we know? What can we recite? What can we say? And we relate that all to our faith. And what James is saying here, that it is much more than what we know. It's what we do. Our faith is only faith when it's lived out. We're saved through faith, but that faith has to be evident in our actions. And our actions, not only our words, display what we truly believe. Throughout the next few weeks, we're going to actually be going through now, looking at faith and how it impacts us in different areas of our life. We're going to look at how it impacts us, what does this life of action, in other words, this life of faith look like when we're living within the church body with our brothers and sisters in Christ? What does this faith that is alive look like when we're in our homes? Whether it's with our kids, whether it's by ourselves. Who are we when no one's looking? And how do we operate within our homes, within the privacy of our personal life? What does this faith that is alive look like? We're going to look at our workplaces, wherever we work or wherever we go to school, the places in which we go and spend a large percentage, if not a large majority of our percentage of time. What does our faith look like lived out in that context? Same thing with our friendships, same thing in our communities, in our neighborhoods. What does this all look like? And to close this morning, I want to share with you just another quick story. I think I have a picture here for you of a tightrope walker. This is from 1860. I believe he has to be the world's history's greatest tightrope walker ever. You may have heard of him before. His name is Charles Blondin. He's just known as Blondin. So this is 1860. He came from France. He was actually part of a circus traveling around North America. Came to Niagara Falls and got this radical idea. He thought, I'm going to tightrope across Niagara Falls. And so he began plans for this. They got a rope 1,100 feet across, 160 feet above the water. And they secured this rope across the water. They began to advertise, promote this, and to tell people. And so crowds gathered to witness this experience, to witness this incredible act of this man walking across the tightrope. And as they gathered, he amazed the crowd with incredible tricks. You can actually see, this is an actual picture down here in the middle of him standing on one leg above Niagara Falls in the tightrope. These are illustrations of all the other things in which he did. There's actually a picture, I don't have it up here, an actual picture of him cooking an omelet. He took in a wheelbarrow, a little wood stove, brought it out into the middle of the rope. He cooked an omelet. Out on the rope, he walked backwards. He sat down. He walked across it on stilts. He did amazing things. And one day as the crowd was gathered, he went up to them after performing some of his act, his tricks out on the rope, and he asked them, how many of you believe I could carry someone across on my back? And of course, everyone just erupted in cheers. Yes, they're really excited to see it. Maybe they're more excited to see somebody fall. They all cheered, yeah, of course he can do this. He can cook an omelet on the rope. Of course he can carry someone across on his back. And then he said, who wants to volunteer? And as he asked that question, there was nobody to raise their hands. Amazingly, one man stepped forward out of the crowd. It actually ended up, it was a close friend of him. And Blondin took this man on his back, and you can see in this picture here, carried him across the tightrope on his back. Man, that is trust. That is faith. There's a difference between this man on this guy's back and the crowd, isn't there? And the difference in this man is that he had faith, that he believed. It didn't matter what the crowd said. There was one who believed, and he's the one that got on his back. God called us to faith, and we proclaimed that we believe. But have our lives displayed that we believe? Have we got on the back of Jesus as he reaches out his hand to us and calls us to him, calls us to a life of faith lived for him? And we got on his back, walked out on the rope, and let him carry us out across it.